talking about the chart of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, U.S. Supreme Court Justice and a living icon. Talk about her chart, do a sort of quasi-rectification, talk about a few things, so check it out. So in the U.S. we have a Supreme Court Justice named Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she's been one of the icons of the women's movement since the mid-60s as a lawyer, and she's become quite a cultural, social force in the legal community in the United States. She's a very liberal Supreme Court Justice, and currently she's quite old, but still full of vitality, but she's had some real health issues the last couple years, but she hangs in there in her mid-80s. Now, she has a fascinating astrology chart, and we have her birth date as March 15th, 1933, and I think she was born in Brooklyn, but we don't have a time. So we don't have the time, so I'm not really sure exactly what the time is, but I'm going to propose a couple things here about that. But when we look at her chart, we do see a debilitated retrograde Mercury in Pisces with the Sun. And, you know, of course, Pisces is definitely, it's a sign that's ruled by Jupiter, which gives us an awareness and a mindset of justice. Now, Sagittarius is much more like legal system justice in that sense, but Pisces is also, it's still ruled by Jupiter, and it's a sense of dharma and purpose. Often it's more metaphysical, cosmic law and dharma and purpose, but it's also about worldly, you know, dharma and purpose, and a sense of fairness and thinking that all of God's creatures should be cared for and protected. You know, Einstein had planets in Pisces. You'll see, you know, Pisces is a very mystical and, you know, sort of gentle sign where we understand that we need to be of service to humanity while we're here and things like that. So she's got Sun and Mercury there, and she's got a powerful Venus and Rahu in Aquarius, and I say it's powerful because Venus is in a very good sign here. It's a sign of a natural friend, and then Saturn, the ruler, is right next to it, so it's a great friend dignity. When you look at the dignities, that's how you calculate it, by the natural relationship and then the proximity of the ruler. So this powerful Venus and Rahu in Aquarius, again, that gives a person a sense of you know, wanting to bring kindness and joy and love into society and culture, because Aquarius is really the sign of culture and the citizens, whereas Leo is the king. Opposite the king are the people, which is Aquarius, right? So she has Venus and Rahu there. Rahu is very powerful in Aquarius. It's said to be the co-ruler of Aquarius, particularly when you do Gemini astrology. So very powerful sign of Aquarius with the gentle Venus and Rahu there. And then Saturn is in Capricorn. Of course, that's very powerful. Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn. And again, because it's right next to that Venus Rahu, it also lends its support as a functional benefic in this chart to Venus. And so again, a very powerful Saturn in Capricorn shows that this is a person who is aware of all of the hardship in life, how you need to get in there and work hard to stand for something. You know, Saturn in Capricorn is one of the most, obviously one of the most powerful because it's the ruler, but it's also the psychological, emotional quality where the nature of Saturn becomes deeply personal and heartfelt, maybe more so than any other sign, particularly when it's a sort of call to arms to make a difference for the plight of normal people and everybody, and to not just shrug those things off, but to really try to show up in service to help people heal the emotional pain and suffering, at least in a larger sense. On a personal sense, it shows that someone will face their own insecurities and fears with a lot of determination, and they'll feel humbled by life, but then also rise above the feeling and the emotional problem that can come from Saturn beating us down a little bit, because it's in its own sign. And so there's a lot of transformation of that Saturn energy from as sort of painful feeling and emotion to something that gives a lot of emotional depth and sensitivity. And then she has the moon in Libra, and this moon is probably in Swati Nakshatra, which would put it in that section, because later in the day it changes into Vishaka when the ascendant moves into Cancer and later, so this is an interesting point to ponder. But if it's in Swati, you know, Swati is related to the god Hanuman, who is the son of Vayu, the god of the wind, and Hanuman is very concerned with social, you know, with social causes, and he was the servant of Lord Rama, and it gives good powers of communication, intelligence, and the power to like scatter like the wind. Hopefully it's a good message, and we get that message out into the public and into the, you know, into the, into the society and the levers of power that can make a difference. So this very much like a sort of Hanuman energy, right? And Hanuman, you know, he's a monkey god. You know, honestly, she kind of looks like a cute little monkey. It's just popping into my head, but you know, she was very attractive when she was younger, but she has that, you know, has that sort of toughness, and that, you know, even though she was, you know, like a small woman and a, you know, and a little, you know, small in stature, she's a fighter, and she's a great devotee, and she's very powerful, mighty, like Lord Hanuman, who, you know, was the great superhero in ancient times. So she's a great hero, like Lord Hanuman was in ancient times. So you could see this power to communicate and to scatter, even to scatter the falsity and the BS in her sort of mental and emotional nature. But again, as I say, when the birth time gets later, it changes into Vishaka later in the day. So that's an interesting point that for a case study, because Vishaka also certainly makes sense, because that's actually even related to the legal system. So a later birth time might make some sense if you would look at it on that point. But as I said, it's looked to me more like the dashas make sense earlier in the day. And then she's got a very powerful conjunction in Leo, Mars, Ketu, and Jupiter. Now, of course, Mars and Jupiter in Leo will be quite formidable because they're both also, you know, very much about about battling, fighting for the truth. Especially Mars fights for the truth, but Jupiter defines the truth. Jupiter is the truth that we're looking toward. And again, not just the truth in the moment. Truth doesn't mean, you know, 2 + 2 = 4, that's a truth. No, the truth is something like women should have the same rights as men. And that truth gives us a goal and a trajectory and something to sacrifice for and to work hard for. The fact that she's got Saturn in Capricorn shows that she'll work hard for it. But that Jupiter in Leo gives that righteous truth. And by the way, this is all sidereal zodiac. Of course, understand Vedic astrology uses sidereal zodiac. Every Vedic astrological text clearly defines the zodiac sidereally. So these are all sidereal placements, of course. And so it's Mars, Jupiter in Leo, again, which is the power of the government, the consistent power, you know, the consistent fire. This is what Leo is. And of course, just to say, if you say that it's, you know, tropical, then it's Virgo. And again, I'm sure it makes sense in Western astrology. In Vedic astrology, with all of the clarity, it's very clear why this works this way. And so, you know, again, you have Mars and Jupiter working through the agencies of government and the domain of the king, which is his court system and his legal system, to effect change. It's also there with Ketu. Again, Ketu is very powerful in Leo. In many texts, you know, Ketu is said to be co-ruler of Leo. Again, if Rahu is co-ruler of Aquarius, then that naturally puts Ketu in Leo, so it's a very powerful place. And so again, Ketu brings this mastery and skill. It's particularly almost exact degree with Mars in Leo. So again, this is really someone who's formidable. She's not going to back down from a fight. With the Mars Jupiter, she'll, you know, fight the good fight, whatever it is that she thinks is the good fight. She'll have the courage and grit and determination to stay with it with that powerful Saturn and bring that sense of beauty that she wants to bring into the world, and that sense of service and higher purpose with Venus in Aquarius, and Venus Rahu in Aquarius. And it's all toward a kind of mindset of you know, something beyond this earth, that there's just a sense of fairness and justice and God's law, which comes from Pisces, you know, more of God's law influencing man's law, like that we're here for a higher purpose, and we should, you know, aspire to bring that holiness and virtue into the world, which is Pisces, where she's got Sun and Mercury. Now, when I started looking for some birth times, you know, you get a few hits. She's such a character. You know, she has such a distinct look and energy and nature. A couple things popped out right away. One was Virgo, another was Scorpio. She looks like just like a, you could just hear the little, you could just hear the analogy of she's a tough little bug. You could just, that just rolls off the tongue with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? Tough little bug is Scorpio. That's literally what Scorpio is, a tough little bug. And another one like Virgo, she kind of looks like the stereotypical Virgo, like the librarian, like the tough librarian, right? With the big glasses and the kind of prim and proper face, right? When I looked at those times, the dashas didn't line up as clearly as I would have maybe expected. But when I looked at Gemini, however, it's really very interesting how the dasha sequence lines up. In particular, you'll see that her Mercury Dasha started in the 60s, which is when she really started her law career and trying cases before the Supreme Court through the 60s and 70s, and then she went into Ketu. But then the big thing that happened in her life was she was appointed to the Supreme Court in the early 90s. I believe it was 93 by Bill Clinton, 93 or 94, and she would have started her Venus Dasha around that time. Like if the ascendant is around 5 degrees, she would have started Venus Dasha in like 1991. Again, why Venus and why Gemini, and what happens when you have a Gemini ascendant? Well, a couple things happen, of course. That puts that Venus Rahu in the 9th house. And that's, again, very powerful. Wherever Rahu is, this is the thing we're really drawn toward in this lifetime. Rahu in the 9th, and the person is definitely drawn toward legal system, teachings. The 9th house is legal system. She would have maybe, you know, one of the most powerful planets in the chart, Venus, right there in that 9th house. And the Venus Dasha would have been like, bam, okay, now these karmas come and you're put on the Supreme Court, right? Also, Saturn becomes really powerful. It is the 9th Lord. A lot of the rulerships really snap into place with that Gemini ascendant. It also puts the ruling planet, Mercury, in the 10th house with the Sun, which just in general within herself would show a strong career focus, where her mind and life and focus revolves around the career. This would have to be there, some version of that. Again, Scorpio also shows very similar themes, because if it's Scorpio, you'd have that Mars, Ketu, Jupiter in the 10th, and you'd have that Sun, Mercury in the 5th house. All of these have to do with the legal system as well. But the dashas didn't line up as well. So again, I don't really know, obviously, but these are the things that I would be looking at. Of course, a rectification takes a lot of time, and this isn't by any means a full rectification. I'm just talking about things that I would go through to kind of, you know, have a starting place. But anyway, so this is a way you kind of read things differently. You have to see the focus of the person as well. Someone's going to have an extreme career focus to wind up doing what she did, because there was every reason for her to just not do it. Why do you think hardly no other women blazed the trail that she did back then? Well, because it was hard, because there were no doors open for women. But her focus was on making a difference and pushing through all of that. So you have to see this. And so again, if it's Gemini ascendant, you have Mercury and the Sun both in the 10th house, driving her toward her purpose. Again, so you look at things like the Sun and the ruling planet. These are the two things you look at to see a person's identity and the focal point of their identity in their lifetime. Sun is it's the universal, what you would say, Atma Karaka, and the ruling planet is the secondary one. And both of them are in the 10th house. And by the way, the other Atma Karaka, I'm looking right now, is Jupiter. So this is regardless, her natural Atmakaraka, using the Gemini astrological techniques, is Jupiter. So you can see how Atmakaraka also works, right? When I recently taught the Gemini workshop at a conference in Sedona, and when distinguishing the Atmakaraka, this is the thing I said. It's like when that thing shows up, you're like, yes, this is the thing I really need to follow in this lifetime. So the natural Atmakaraka is the sun. We're all following the sun to some extent. The personal Atmakaraka in each lifetime is the one with the highest degrees of longitude in the sidereal sign, which in her case is Jupiter. Again, Jupiter is justice, it is righteousness. All of that's the same regardless of the ascendant. But again, in this case, when you get a Gemini ascendant, the natural, or I'm sorry, her ruling planet, which is how it feels to be alive in this lifetime and what we're motivated by, that thing goes into the 10th house as well with the sun. Now, the other thing to understand is that Saturn is also aspecting that Sun Mercury, and so is Mars. So that Sun Mercury and Pisces get an aspect, 3rd degree aspect from Saturn, and an 8th degree aspect from Mars. And you know, with the Mercury, it's getting a pretty direct aspect from both. Saturn is 19 aspecting Mercury at 14, and Mars is 12 aspecting Mercury at 14. So that Mercury gets a lot of support even though it's in its debilitated state. It's also retrograde, so retrograde debilitated is a very strong Nichabanga. So you can clearly see the qualities of Gemini as well. Now, you know, as I said, Virgo and Scorpio kind of look much more likely, but at the time of the day when you have the Gemini rising, a lot of those Dasha factors really snap into place. Getting appointed to the Supreme Court, and you see, you know, again, Venus goes into the 9th with Rahu. Saturn is really powerful. It's the 8th and 9th Lord. Again, these are the things that would show the support to succeed with that kind of a career. You need the 9th Lord to be powerful, right? And you also see that Mars, Ketu, Jupiter, they're in the 3rd house, which is where we'll fight like hell for what we believe in. Gemini is it's a man with a club. As part of it is the man with the club. And she's got Mars and Jupiter in Leo, right? And again, that's regardless of the ascendant, but if it's Gemini, that's the 3rd house, which shows, is this person going to be tough and fight? You better believe it. Will she have the courage to fight? Oh yeah, Mars in the 3rd, especially with Ketu and Jupiter. Oh yeah, she'll have the courage to fight. That also puts the moon in the 5th. Again, the 5th house also has a lot to do with justice. Like as we teach children, a sense of growth and intelligence. Usually the moon in the 5th and someone's quite intelligent, or at least they're interested in learning. It's usually a sign of intelligence, the moon in the 5th. And you know, their heart is aligned with that place where we learn and grow and become intelligent. Doesn't necessarily even mean book smart, but it means that they know how to learn throughout their life. And that means learning how to get what we want, learning how to succeed. It's a very, frankly, I think it's the best house, because it's very close to where it has directional strength, because it has directional strength in the 4th, but it's right next to it, and it's a Dharma house. It's right there. So it really brings that heart into the place of learning and purpose. So regardless of what the dashas are, I mainly like to talk about these things to show how someone would work and maybe think about these issues. Not necessarily to be like, oh, I don't think it's that, or how do you know, or whatever. You know, because sometimes it's good to get insight into why astrologers might approach something like a rectification. You want to see that the house rulers line up, that the sense of you know, what drives the person is congruent. You want to see that generally the dashas line up the way something would make sense, because you got to remember, not many people are appointed to the Supreme Court. So you're going to have to see something happen around the early 90s in the dashas that's going to be just explosive, right? You know, and when you consider, you know, again, what her nature is like, plus when you listen to her, she's extremely articulate, and I mean, you know, Gemini would really make sense as well. This is someone who, you know, writes legal briefs and very intellectual. So a Mercury ascendant also makes a lot of sense, because, you know, around the Taurus, that also makes sense, but Taurus starts to dilute the drive of the person a little bit, I think. So the other thing is, when you look around this area, she would have switched into the moon dasha around 2017, which is shortly after we had the recent election. Again, the moon is also a planet of fame and recognition, and she's definitely got a lot of fame the last couple years. Notorious RBG, and, you know, partly because now she's like a firewall against one more conservative justice being appointed to the court, which again would shift the ideological legal system in the U.S. for decades. And the moon dasha, you know, she's come up with, you know, she's had more health problems, difficulties. Moon for Gemini is what's called a marika. It's a difficult house ruler. And, you know, so you see this shift again in her life in early 2017. So again, just kind of finagling the way the dashas might make sense. This makes a lot of sense. Mid-60s, she went into the dasha of her ruling planet Mercury. This is where she really stepped into her stride, stepped into herself. Trying cases before the Supreme Court, making a name for herself, really stepping into her identity and dharma. Whereas if it's Gemini, Mercury is a dharma planet. Through the Mercury, then the Ketu, then Venus, again, her fifth lord, you know, forming that powerful placement in her ninth house, she becomes appointed to the Supreme Court. You know, decades pass. Moon dasha, we have a whole shift in the country ideologically. She gets all this fame and recognition right when the moon dasha starts, or as the moon dasha starts. Now her health has become an issue. There's other things that are going on, and the moon is definitely a marika planet. Not only is it a marika planet, but it rules Saturn in her 8th house, because it rules Shravana nakshatra. And we look at what the planets rule through Rashi and Nakshatra in their dasha cycle, at least in aggregate. So the moon is not only a planet of fame and recognition and love coming to us if we've earned it, again, because the moon is what we receive. This is why the moon is a planet, they say, of fame. If you've done something to earn fame, sometimes it's infamy, but it can be what comes to us, what comes our way. And if someone is predisposed to a public life or something, the moon often shows that they're very, you know, it shows a time when the good grace that they've put out comes back to them. So she's gone through Venus dasha, Sun dasha in the public eye. Now moon, she's getting this surprising amount of attention. So regardless if that dasha's, if that's absolutely correct, I think it's a good place to start. And other things do make sense as well. I did look at Scorpio. I looked at some of the ones later. Scorpio makes sense as well, because then that Mercury Sun is in her 5th house. Major Raja Yogas up there would be the 10th Lord in the 5th. Also that Mars Jupiter would be in the 10th with Ketu, also shows a career that could be in the legal system. But again, at that point, the dashas stop making as much sense. And that's why I like to just put up this one with Gemini. And anyway, it's interesting to ponder. I hope you enjoyed this case study. She's fascinating, trailblazing, amazing woman, and let's hope she sticks around for a few more years. So, take care.